Welcome to the Insomnia Project. Sit back, relax, listen, as we try to have a mundane conversation so that you can just feel free to drift off and find yourself some sleep. I'm your host, Marco Timpano, and alongside me right now is a beautiful canal river with an alligator often bobbing its head back and forth. So that means one thing. I'm in Florida with my father-in-law, Daniel Barker. Daniel, welcome to the Insomnia Project yet again.
Why, thank you. Thank you. If you don't mind, I'm going to drink some coffee because I have a tendency to put myself to sleep. So
that's perfectly fine. Just careful when you put the coffee cup down that you don't make such a loud noise because the mic will pick it up.
Yes, sir.
I figured since we're in Florida and I'm always recording with you in Florida, I think it's only appropriate that we talk about Florida. We talked about Massachusetts last time we recorded, but now I think it's important to talk about Florida. So how did you end up in Florida?
Okay. Well, let's pick up where we left off. Both my wife and myself come from a small town in New England, in Massachusetts, where we grew up. And back around 1985, 86, I had a job offer to work up in Canada. And so, therefore, we sold our possessions and everything else in Massachusetts to move up. And I told my wife, I said, since I had been traveling up there, I said, well, I really think the other thing we need to do is find a warm spot we can run to. And I said, especially for you. And her first reaction was, well, I'm not afraid of the cold. I like the cold. I said, oh, it's not quite the whole story. I said, when the winters come along, you're going to get stuck in the house. And it could be for weeks on end, could be for months. And you're going to get this thing called cabin fever.
Right.
So if you had a place to run to and you knew it was there, that will help alleviate that situation. So we had a timeshare, and we started trading our timeshare and going to all these spots in the southern U.S. mostly to find our little cabin, our little place to run to. And we checked out Arizona, we checked out the Gulf Coast area, and we checked out the Eastern Seaboard, Carolinas, etc. And what happened after 3-4 years is we ended up in this town called Sebastian at a timeshare.
This is in Florida.
This is in Florida. And we had just left a bitterly cold week up in Canada. And I got off the plane, and all of a sudden this warm breeze hit you. And you go, oh, boy, that's nice. Get to our timeshare, and it was overlooking the Indian River, which is right next to the ocean. And came out on the veranda and just breathed in this warm, moist, southern air. And I looked at my wife, I said, this is it. This is, sign me up. I don't know what it's going to cost, but this is the place. And so we ended up in Sebastian, which was a small little fishing community. And our first place was a double wide. It was a small little cabin that we talked about.
What do you mean by a double wide?
Well, it's just think of two trailers put together.
Okay.
And that's how they build them, and they're very popular down here. There's no foundation. They are trailers. I mean, you can put wheels under them and cart them off if you want. But this was most probably about 1,100 square feet. And it was everything we needed or wanted. It had 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms.
1,100 square feet is nothing to snark at. That's a decent sized place.
Yeah, it is.
Especially when you're talking about condos that are 600 square feet, 500 square feet
Sure,
that they're selling
sure.
in various cities.
But again, we're not in a city.
Sure.
We're in the country here. And so we looked around, looked at a few places, and then we found this one little place. An older couple had it for years. And it just suited our needs. It was within our price range, which was quite low.
Okay.
But we could pay cash for it, et cetera. So we bought it. And that gave us years of happiness because we'd bring the whole family down. It was big enough for that. And
Now, that wasn't in Sebastian, right? That was in Barefoot Bay?
that was Barefoot Bay, which is really only a couple miles from the town of Sebastian.
Okay.
So it's the same neighborhood, if you will. Now, the other thing that sold us is we had an ex-neighbor of mine in Massachusetts who had moved down here. So she kind of showed us around and all the sites, et cetera. That's how we ended up here.
I see. So tell me about this area. You mentioned the Indian River. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the Indian River, one of its sort of claim to fame is that's where we get a lot of the grapefruit. There's a sticker that says Indian River on it.
That's very true. At one time, this area was known for its citrus, and there were brands, Indian River grapefruit, Indian River oranges, limes, lemons, etc. That's even in the time that we've been here, but we have been here for almost 30 years, in and out. Things have happened, and one of the things, two major things. One, there was a blight on citrus that killed a lot of orchards.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yes. And so I could show you half a dozen packing houses that haven't been in operation for a dozen years. The other thing is, this place, I'm going to say, got discovered.
Oh.
And a lot of people, especially of retirement age, came down here. And so a lot of those orchards were turned into housing developments, etc.
Well, one of the beautiful things about this area, and I think it's due to the fact that there's a lot of retirees who live here, is that it's very calm. Mm-hmm. There's not a hustle and bustle that you'll notice when you're in Orlando, let's say. It's much more peaceful.
It is. Our neighborhood is quite... it's quiet. It's a very quiet neighborhood. And and of course we have regular, young families,
sure,
etc. But, you don't see the kids playing ball in the streets or anything like that. It's a good, quiet area. It's getting developed. It's growing. But I think in my lifetime it'll be pretty much the way you see it.
I see.
Yeah.
Let's shift to the coast a bit.
Okay.
Because I know that the coast, and we're talking, I guess, Vero at this point, Vero Beach, where there was a lot of shipwreck and discoveries of doubloons and stuff like that.
Well, the history...
Is it Vero? Am I correct?
Well, actually, it was Sebastian.
Oh, it's still Sebastian.
Yeah, Sebastian Inlet was where the shipwreck happened, and it was more than one ship. But this is known as the Treasure Coast because of it. And what we had was back in 1715, the Spanish fleet once a year would get all the gold, silver, all the valuables, emeralds, etc.
This is way back.
1715, it's
right.
Way back.
Okay.
And there would be an armada, and the armada would take all of these valuables over to Spain. In 1 year, 1715 again, what happened is they came up the coast of Florida, and they hit a hurricane.
Oh.
And what you have just off our shores here is water that actually has sandbars if you go 100 yards out, etc. Well, these ships were floundering, just getting pounded by this hurricane. And it's never been established, I think it's never been established how many ships went down.
Okay.
But roughly at least a dozen, maybe up to 20.
Wow.
That were scattered within, let's say, a 15-mile area of this of Sebastian, Sebastian Inlet. And the survivors of the shipwreck actually made camp right in Sebastian. And there's a little, very small museum dedicated to them, where they have found artifacts, everything from cannons to silverware to whatever. But again, these ships were laden down with gold, silver, etc.
Right.
And it's an interesting story because what happened was one of the locals,
A Sebastianite?
Of Sebastian, yeah, would go down to the beach almost every morning with his dog, looking for driftwood. He liked to carve and make things out of driftwood. And one day his friend said, you're going down in the morning. I'd like to join you just to walk the beach, because these beaches are beautiful and there's very little on them.
Pristine.
Very pristine. And so they were walking down, and the gentleman looks at his friend and says, well, one thing I like to do is I like to find these flat rocks and skim them over the water. So he picks a few up and skims them, and they bounce, etc. His friend looks at him and says, hey, wait a minute. They're not black rocks. These are pieces of silver, pieces of 8. And all of a sudden they went, oh, really? He said, well, I know, I find piles of them right on the water. So they went back and they devised a plan. And they knew they needed help, so they got 5 of their friends. So now there's 7 of these local gentlemen. And they get a boat and everything, and they go off. And they're finding handfuls of stuff. One interesting day, and they always did it on the weekend because they had to work during the week. One interesting day, they got all their stuff, go back to this man's house, which is more or less a cabin. And they always would, of course, being men, go out and have a beer afterwards,
Sure.
right? So they took all their findings and just threw it on the bed. Just emptied their pockets, threw everything on the bed. Went and had their beer and laughed it up, etc., and went back and counted what they had. They realized what they had on the bed was over $1 million worth of gold and silver.
Oh, wow.
And emeralds. And all of a sudden they realized, wait a minute, this isn't just a little hobby. We got to do something serious here. They did some research, and you have to understand the Spanish back in the time would not disclose where these ships went down. Why? Because there were English privateers. Spain and England were always at odds.
Sure.
You had the Dutch. You had all these European powers that were over here. But Florida at that time was basically Spanish. At any rate, they wouldn't. So when they went to do their research, they actually went over to Seville, Spain, looking up all the old records and doing their best to figure out a pinpoint where this fleet
That's just the
down.
fridge, the sound of the fridge making ice, in case anyone's wondering.
Yeah, that's not me gurgling yet.
No, not yet.
That happens a little later. So anyways, they did their research, and about the only thing they could come up with is that most of the records said the ships went down off the Keys. Well, we're a good 200 miles, 250 miles from the Keys. And
That's the Florida Keys,
The
like
Florida
Key West
Keys,
and Key
yeah.
Largo, for people who are wondering what that is.
And so what happens is they found one record where the captain of one of these ships said it was, so many degrees north, so many degrees west, blah, blah, blah. And they realized, wait a minute, that's us. That's where we are. So let's take that as a hint. Now, they go out in their boats, they do a little snorkeling, And they find some more stuff. But it's always a few of this, a few of that.
Sure.
They finally got a professional from San Diego called Mel Fisher involved. And he came and moved to Florida, and he was more, let's say, comprehensive in his search, etc. And sure enough, he came up with the ships.
Wow.
And his family has a little museum here right in Sebastian. And still, a lot of the goods are there, and we'll show you how they clean them up and, not destroy them.
Right.
And so it's quite interesting historically. Now, Mel Fisher found quite a bit. Now, he's also found a ship, a very large ship, off the Keys called the Atocha.
Okay.
And that's a very famous shipwreck. But he spent his time up here.
With these 7 people, these 7 guys?
These 7, yeah, they incorporated themselves into a company, got permission from the state, had a little problem. They had to get permission or at least figure out if the Spanish government still had title to any of this. So legally, they spent a couple of years doing all this wrangling. But nonetheless, they did find the goods, a lot of the ships. Fact of the matter is, they haven't found them all.
Oh, wow. So when was the last shipwreck or the discovery of the gold and silver and emeralds and other gemstones found?
Just about a year ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yep. Because the Mel Fisher expeditions was a few years back, right?
Yes.
And so they've just found it a year ago, another search party?
Yes. You have to be licensed by the state to even go out and look for it. And this one outfit, local outfit again.
Wow.
And I've seen their boat out there because they have these big, what look like silos that come back over the engine, and that blows the sand off underneath the water.
Oh, okay.
So I've seen them in action, and it's only been a few yards off the coast. And sure enough, one day it was reported. In one day they found over $1 million worth of gold and silver.
Wow.
Which could be spread out on this table. It's really not that much in quantity, but I mean, gold at whatever it is nowadays, $1,300 or $2,000 an ounce.
Okay.
Yeah, it's worth quite a bit.
Wow. Now, have you ever found one of those black rocks, flat rocks on the beach yet?
No, I'm still looking.
You're still looking.
I even had a metal detector. And after many tries, the best I ever did is I found 1 penny. And wasn't an old one.
It wasn't an old one either. Oh, there you go.
So I was spending too much money in batteries. But I will tell you this.
Yes.
There was a documentary done many years ago about this. Just think of your 60-minute type of thing. And the correspondent was interviewing these guys with their detectors on the beach.
Sure.
And as he's talking to one guy, have you ever found anything, blah, 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 blah. A guy in back of him hit something, goes down and pulled up a 7-foot gold chain.
Wow.
Yeah. All the links are in there. Unbelievable.
Oh, my goodness.
Just a few inches below the sand.
Wow.
Now, for those that would like to do that, you're more than welcome to come down, but you have to understand the state takes care of the beaches, which means every few years they'll bring in sand and dump it on the beach and spread it out. So you're not going to find it a couple inches below. You'd have to go 6 feet below nowadays if there's anything there.
And do you owe part of your findings to the state?
Yes.
Okay.
They're entitled. By the time you get down, it used to be a 50-50 split. I believe, and I could be wrong, that by the time you get through with everything, you're going to be lucky to get 30-35% of the value.
Wow. So, Sebastian, one time famous for its golden oranges and grapefruit. Also famous for its treasures off the coast. What else? What is Sebastian known for?
Well, around 1900, turn of the century, Sebastian was a sleepy little fishing village. Now, we still do fishing, commercial fishing.
Oh, I see.
off the coast here. And mostly for red snapper, tilapia,
mahi.
Yep. Once in a while a swordfish, but you don't hear too often.
Sure.
And they'll go out early in the morning, and I get a kick out of it because, of course, I'm from New England, and most of the fishing boats are very big trawlers, or looked big to me when I was a kid, etc. But these are boats that they trailer. They're odd-looking craft, but they do trailer them down and take them out after they're done in the day.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know who's a fisherman because you just go by the yard and the boat will be sitting there.
Why do they do that? It's just because of the size of the boat, or?
I think so. Plus, space on a pier down here is getting quite valuable.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So they must probably figure it's cheaper to do it that way.
Right. One of the things I love about coming to Sebastian is when you drive into the town proper, there's a sign that says Sebastian, and I know I'm going to get this wrong, 6 grouches and 1, what is it? What is the saying?
I'm trying to remember.
Okay, let me look it up.
But it's like 6 grouches and 1 nice person or something.
Something like that.
But it is on all the signposts coming into the town. Hopefully, with the dead air here, that some people have fallen asleep.
It says 6 grouches, but it doesn't give me the...
I think what's interesting is some of the older people that have lived in town for a number of years will tell you, oh yeah, I knew those 6 grouches.
Okay. All right, the sign says, "Welcome to Sebastian, home of Pelican Island, friendly people, and 6 old grouches."
Yeah.
So that's what the sign actually says when you drive in. So...
And I didn't mention Pelican Island.
No, what you've pointed it out to me, but tell me about Pelican Island.
Well, Pelican Island is a sanctuary. It was the first, and I'll most probably not get this correct, the first national park designated as a national park. And what it is, it's an island out in the middle of the Indian River. And what will happen is at night, all the birds will fly there, all the terns, you get everything there, all types of birds.
Sure.
Go to this island. And I've been told by quote-unquote experts around that the reason they do that is there's no chance of snakes out there.
Oh.
Which I find interesting. So they know they're safe there from any predators. And as such, that's where they go. But what happened around 1900 to most probably up to the 1920s, it was the fashion of women to use feathers in a lot of their clothing, especially hats.
Right.
And people would hunt these birds to their, demise.
Right.
Just for the feathers. And so once they were protected, then I believe it was Teddy Roosevelt, after he left office, but he petitioned, etc., and got this as the first, quote-unquote, national park.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Pelican Island.
Pelican Island.
Here in Sebastian.
Yeah.
Well, that's an incredible story.
Yeah. And it was because of the feather trade, shall we call it.
Wow.
So.
And now if you do come to Sebastian, you will find a whole bunch of great restaurants, areas to shop. It's not that far from Orlando. In fact, there's an airport not far from Sebastian that they call Orlando Melbourne Airport, but really you're an hour away from Orlando if you fly into that airport.
Yes, because of the expansion of Orlando, not just Disney, but Universal has a couple theme parks, and it just goes on. It's a real vacation land. That they've taken some of the outlying airports like Sanford, Melbourne, and I'm sure a few others that I'm not aware of their names, but here over in the east, and they now call it Sanford, Orlando,
Right.
Melbourne, Orlando. So, and Orlando is quite a large airport, as you know.
Sure. Well, there you go. Well, Dan, I want to thank you so much for this trip around Sebastian. Before we go, I want to mention to our Patreon patrons, we're going to continue this conversation with Dan. So go to our patreon.com/the Insomnia Project page, and you can hear more of our conversation. But for our listeners who are listening on iTunes, Stitcher, maybe Radio Public, which we encourage you to listen on Radio Public because we do get, some money for every listen. We want to wish you a great rest of your day, and we hope that you were able to listen and sleep. Thank you, Dan.
Oh, thank you.